Stonehenge rises from the windswept plains of Salisbury, a crown of colossal stones that has stood in silence for nearly 5,000 years. To the untrained eye, it may seem like little more than a circle of weathered rock, but those who approach with reverence sense something deeper, a presence, as though the monument itself remembers every hand that placed it and every ritual performed in its shadow. It is not merely a ruin. It is a riddle carved in stone. The scale alone is staggering. Some of its upright sarsen stones soar over 20 feet high and weigh as much as 40 tons. Others were transported from quarries in Wales, nearly 200 miles away, a feat that defies easy explanation even today. To imagine prehistoric people, without wheels or metal tools, dragging and arranging such megaliths with precision, is to glimpse a determination that borders on the impossible. It is this clash between human limitation and monumental achievement that gives Stonehenge its aura of otherworldliness. But its mystery does not end with its construction. For centuries, the monument has been wrapped in speculation. A temple of ancient gods, a calendar aligned with celestial movements, a site of healing, or even a gateway between worlds. Each theory captures only a fragment of truth, for the circle seems to absorb every explanation and reflect back something larger, something that resists simplification. It is both a place and an idea, a stage where the human longing for meaning collides with the immensity of time. Even in antiquity, Stonehenge was recognized as extraordinary. Medieval chroniclers whispered that Merlin, the wizard of Arthurian legend, transported the stones by magic. Others insisted they were relics of giants. The monument became a canvas for myth, its silent presence demanding stories that could bridge the impossible gap between ordinary human effort and the impossible vision it represents. And perhaps that is the essence of its power. It draws us into the unknown, forcing us to imagine forces greater than ourselves. Modern archaeology has chipped away at the riddle, uncovering traces of cremated remains buried within the earthworks, suggesting the site may once have been a vast ceremonial ground of death and remembrance. Excavations reveal phases of construction spanning centuries, as if each generation felt compelled to add its own chapter to a monument larger than life itself. Yet every discovery deepens the enigma rather than resolves it. Who were these people that invested such unimaginable effort? What compelled them to bend their lives around stone? And why here, on this desolate plain? The stones themselves whisper clues. Alignments with the midsummer sunrise and the midwinter sunset suggest a deep connection to the heavens, a place where earth and sky met in ritual harmony. The monument seems to breathe in rhythm with the cosmos, marking the turning of the year, anchoring human life to the eternal dance of the sun. In this light, Stonehenge becomes not just a structure, but a bridge, a way of binding the mortal world to the eternal cycles above. Yet even this explanation feels incomplete. If it were only a calendar, it could have been simpler, smaller, less magnificent. There is something excessive in its ambition, as if its builders sought not just practicality, but transcendence. It was a declaration that even in an age of stone and bone, humanity could create something eternal, something that would stand as long as the sky itself. Standing at its center, one feels not only the weight of the stones, but the weight of time. Thousands of years of human history have swept around these monoliths. Empires have risen and crumbled. Languages have been born and forgotten. Yet Stonehenge endures unchanged. It is a reminder that while civilizations vanish, certain human impulses, the desire to understand the universe, to honor the dead, to leave a mark upon eternity, remain unbroken threads woven through all of history. Today, millions come to gaze upon it, to photograph it, to wonder at it. But beneath the tourist's curiosity lingers the same awe that stirred the builders millennia ago. Because Stonehenge does not give answers. It provokes questions. It is not simply a ruin on a hill. It is a monument wrapped in shadows, a voice from a forgotten age calling across the abyss of time. And even as science inches closer to uncovering its secrets, the truth may be that Stonehenge was never meant to be fully understood. It was built to inspire wonder, and in that, it has succeeded for nearly 5 millennia. The story of Stonehenge does not begin with the finished monument we see today, but with the stones themselves, immovable giants that seem to carry the weight of another age. Each block is more than just a piece of rock. Each is a question carved from the earth and placed into human hands. How these stones were sourced, shaped, and carried across the landscape reveals a tale of ambition so extraordinary it borders on the impossible. The site is dominated by 2 types of stone, the massive sarsens and the smaller, though equally mysterious, bluestones. The sarsens, towering at up to 30 feet and weighing more than 25 tons, were once thought to have been dragged from as far as the Marlborough Downs, 20 miles away. Yet this modest distance becomes an epic journey when we imagine the Neolithic builders, lacking wheels, iron tools, or beasts of burden. To move one sarsen would have required 100 hands, ropes woven from plant fibers, and wooden sledges sliding across tracks of greased logs. A single misstep could spell disaster. Still, they persevered, driven by an unshakable vision. The bluestones, however, present an even greater enigma. These stones, some weighing up to 4 tons, are geologically traced not to the plains of southern England, but to the Preseli Hills in Wales, over 150 miles away. For decades, scholars believed that glaciers during the Ice Age had carried them closer to Salisbury Plain, leaving them for humans to discover. But new research shattered that idea. Recent excavations at ancient quarries in Wales revealed unmistakable signs of human effort. Wedges hammered into cracks, stones pried from their native cliffs, and trackways suggesting deliberate removal. This was no accident of nature. These stones were chosen, cut, and transported across an unforgiving terrain. To envision this feat is to step into the lives of Neolithic engineers. Imagine groups of builders maneuvering stones across rivers, through dense forests, and over steep hills. They may have floated them on rafts down the Bristol Channel, or dragged them along land routes using nothing but determination and unity. Each step of the way required knowledge of woodcraft, waterways, and teamwork beyond anything we typically assign to people of that era. Far from primitive, these were individuals who possessed an understanding of nature so profound it blurred the line between survival and mastery. The question that lingers is not only how they moved the stones, but why these particular stones? Why travel hundreds of miles to gather bluestones when local rock lay abundant around them? Some believe these stones carried sacred qualities. In Welsh folklore, stones from the Preseli Hills were said to hold healing powers, capable of drawing illness from the body. To transport them was not just an act of labor, but of devotion, as though the builders were carrying fragments of a holy land to establish a sanctuary far from its birthplace. This duality, the raw physical struggle and the unseen spiritual purpose, infuses Stonehenge with its enduring mystery. The monument is not simply a construction of rock, but a fusion of human endurance and belief. Every sarsen dragged across the downs, every bluestone ferried over rivers, represents a victory over the impossible. Yet each stone also whispers of meaning lost to time, of rituals and symbols that refuse to be translated by modern minds. The origins of the stones remind us that Stonehenge was never just about what was built, but about the journey to build it. The act of moving such immense weights bound entire communities together. It was in the collective effort, the sweat, the struggle, the shared vision, that Stonehenge was born, long before the stones were raised into their iconic circle. The monument, in truth, began on the roads and rivers that carried its stones to Salisbury Plain. And yet, the deeper we trace their origins, the more questions emerge. Were the bluestones chosen because they healed, or because they connected this monument to distant lands and peoples? Were the sarsens raised to stand as guardians, or as markers of the heavens? Science provides answers about geology and transport, But the purpose, the why behind the impossible, remains cloaked in silence. The stones speak, but in a language long forgotten. Their weight is measured not just in tons of rock, but in the enormity of human will, the audacity to reshape the land itself. It is here, in their origins, that Stonehenge first reveals itself not as a ruin, but as a story of vision, sacrifice, and mystery. A story that begins with rock and ends with wonder. The stones of Stonehenge rise like silent sentinels, casting shadows over the plains of Salisbury. Their presence is commanding, almost supernatural, and yet the true marvel lies not in their endurance, but in the mystery of their creation. For here, 5,000 years ago, a people without metal tools, without wheels, and without written language managed to raise one of the most enduring monuments of human history. The builders were Neolithic farmers, people whose lives revolved around the cycles of the seasons, the cultivation of crops, and the tending of animals. They lived in wooden huts, tilled the land with tools of flint, and wove simple fabrics. And yet, from within this modest existence, they summoned the vision and the strength to create something that would outlast empires. The stones themselves tell the story. The smaller bluestones, weighing up to 4 tons each, were dragged from the Preseli Hills of Wales, nearly 150 miles away. Imagine the determination it required to haul these immense blocks across rivers, forests, and mountains without the benefit of carts or beasts of burden. Some scholars suggest they floated them on rafts along rivers, while others argue they dragged them over land on sledges and rollers made of tree trunks. Whichever method they used, the effort would have demanded an astonishing level of planning, coordination, and endurance. But the bluestones were only the beginning. The towering sarsens, the larger stones that dominate Stonehenge, stand as the true testaments to human resolve. Each one weighs more than 25 tons. These colossal monoliths were quarried from the Marlborough Downs, some 20 miles away, and then transported to the site. To raise them upright required pits to be dug, stones carefully levered into place, and the earth packed around their bases to secure them. The lintels, the horizontal stones placed atop the uprights, demanded even greater ingenuity. The builders crafted mortise and tenon joints, a system of interlocking notches more commonly associated with carpentry than megaliths, to hold the stones together. It was engineering at its purest, born not from machines, but from sheer human will. To think of Stonehenge purely as an engineering marvel, however, misses the deeper story. This was not the work of a few individuals, but of a society united under a shared vision. Hundreds of people must have labored together, farmers, herders, hunters, all leaving behind their daily survival to dedicate themselves to this monumental task. Archaeological evidence suggests that Stonehenge was not just a construction site, but also a gathering place. Animal bones unearthed nearby reveal massive feasts, where entire communities came together, perhaps celebrating each new stage of the work, reinforcing their bonds with food, song, and ritual. Why did they do it? Why would a people without wealth or empire invest generations of effort into this monument? The answers lie in the way they saw the world. For the Neolithic mind, the land was alive with spirits, the sky was a vast calendar, and life itself was bound to the rhythm of the sun and the moon. Stonehenge, with its alignment to the solstices, may have served as a kind of sacred timekeeper, ensuring that planting and harvesting were in harmony with the heavens. It may also have been a place of burial, a portal between the world of the living and the realm of the ancestors. Each stone raised was not just a feat of labor, but an offering, a bridge between earth and sky, man and cosmos. Modern engineers marvel at Stonehenge because even with cranes and modern machinery, replicating it would be no small task. And yet, these Neolithic builders, armed only with ropes, wooden tools, and their own bodies, succeeded where logic says they should have failed. The more we study the monument, the more respect it commands, not only for the intelligence of its design, but for the spirit of those who built it. To walk among the stones today is to feel their determination echo through time. These builders lived in a world of fragility, where winters could be harsh, crops uncertain, and survival never guaranteed. Yet they devoted themselves to something that transcended survival. They reached beyond the limits of necessity and left behind a structure that whispers of eternity. The legacy of Stonehenge is not just stone and silence. It is a reminder that greatness often comes not from advanced tools, but from the unity of purpose, the will to endure, and the belief in something larger than oneself. The Neolithic builders, forgotten by name, achieved immortality through their creation. Their hands are long turned to dust, but their vision endures in stone. And as we gaze upon their work, we are forced to confront a humbling truth. Sometimes the impossible is only impossible until it is done. Stonehenge. For centuries, it has stood in silence, a ring of colossal stones rising from the Salisbury Plain. To some, it is merely an ancient ruin. To others, it is a temple, a burial ground, a gathering place of forgotten rites. But beneath its weathered stones lies something far more astonishing, a system of knowledge, carved not into parchment or clay, but into the very architecture of the earth itself. Recent discoveries have begun to unravel one of Stonehenge's greatest secrets, its role as a vast solar calendar. What we once believed to be a monument of mystery may have been nothing less than a prehistoric clock, marking time with an accuracy that rivals the great civilizations of Egypt and Mesoamerica. The arrangement of the massive sarsen stones, those great pillars weighing up to 25 tons each, follows a logic. Archaeologists now believe the circle was carefully designed to track the solar year, dividing it into 365.25 days. Each upright stone, each lintel balanced precariously above, served a purpose in a grand equation of the heavens. It was not chaos. It was not random. It was deliberate design. At the heart of this discovery lies the alignment with the solstices. Twice each year, on the longest and shortest days, the rising and setting sun threads itself through the monument's axis, casting light in a way that cannot be accidental. This alignment is no coincidence. It is the signature of an ancient intelligence, one that understood the rhythm of the cosmos. But the genius of Stonehenge was not just in marking solstices. Researchers believe that the sarsen circle itself was designed as a perpetual calendar. The 30 uprights corresponded to days in a month, the 5 trilithons to intercalary days needed to complete a solar year. A leap day system may even have been encoded into the monument's architecture, correcting for the quarter-day drift. Imagine that, nearly 5,000 years ago, people who left no written language still devised a calendar as precise as ours today. The implications of this are staggering. Time, after all, is power. To measure time is to master cycles of planting and harvest, to predict the ebb and flow of seasons, to control rituals of life and death. A calendar transforms chaos into order, turning survival into stability. Whoever held the key to Stonehenge's secrets could dictate when to sow, when to reap, and when to honor the gods. Control of time itself was a form of dominion. And yet, one cannot help but wonder who exactly devised this calendar? Was it the work of a single visionary leader, a shaman who mapped the skies? Or was it the collective genius of a community, passing down generational knowledge of sun, moon, and stars? The builders left us no written testimony. Their voices have vanished, but their architecture speaks in silence. Even more haunting is the realization that Stonehenge predates many of the great civilizations we usually credit with advancing astronomy. Before the pyramids of Egypt were raised, before Babylonian astronomers charted the skies, the people of Britain were carving time into stone. It raises an unsettling possibility. What if the roots of scientific knowledge stretch back far earlier than we dare admit? The calendar encoded at Stonehenge was not merely a scientific tool, it was also deeply spiritual. To ancient peoples, the sun was more than light and warmth. It was a divine force, the giver of life, the eternal fire in the sky. To capture its movements within a monument was an act of reverence, but also of audacity. It was as if humanity was saying, "We can measure the will of the gods. We can inscribe eternity into stone." And so Stonehenge was not simply a calendar. It was a theater of the cosmos. Each solstice, the rising sun would blaze across the altar stone, a spectacle of fire and shadow that may have been greeted with awe, song, and sacrifice. Imagine the crowd gathered in silence, watching as the first rays of summer dawn pierced the horizon, threading perfectly through the stone corridor, bathing the monument in gold. In that moment, time itself stood revealed. This blending of science and ritual, of calculation and awe, reveals something profound about our ancestors. For them, there was no division between astronomy and spirituality. To study the heavens was to touch the divine. To measure days was to bring order to the sacred. Stonehenge was both clock and temple, both observatory and altar. Even today, the stones retain their grip on the imagination. We see them not only as relics of the past, but as reminders of an eternal human quest to understand our place in the universe, to seek patterns in the stars, to carve meaning into the passage of days, to bind the mysteries of existence into something we can grasp. Perhaps that is why Stonehenge continues to resonate. It is not only a monument to the dead, nor merely a calendar of stone. It is a message across time, a declaration that even in an age before writing, before machines, before empires, humanity looked to the heavens and dared to map eternity. And so, as the sun still rises and sets upon these ancient stones, we are left with a humbling realization. The people who built Stonehenge are gone, but their calendar remains. A silent, eternal clock that continues to keep pace with the turning of the earth. A reminder that while civilizations rise and fall, the rhythm of the cosmos endures, and through it, so does their legacy, Stonehenge. A circle of stones standing defiant against the erosion of time. For centuries, they've been framed as silent guardians of a forgotten past. But what if they weren't meant to be silent at all? What if the stones were carefully placed not only to align with the heavens, but to shape the air, to command sound, to turn whispers into something that felt like the voice of gods? Recent experiments have revealed something extraordinary. Stonehenge was an instrument. Not a flute nor a drum, but a vast and resonant amplifier. Each monolith was more than stone. It was a tool of vibration. When arranged in their mysterious circle, the stones created an acoustic chamber where voices would carry, where chants could tremble through the chest, where the air itself became sacred. Step into that circle, and suddenly the world outside fades. The rolling hills are muffled. The wind loses its bite. Instead, what dominates is the echo, the way sound folds back onto itself, the way words don't die but linger, hanging in the air as if unseen presences are repeating them. Imagine a single priest raising his voice, and the circle giving it back, stronger, fuller, more commanding than before. To the people gathered, it must have felt as though the gods themselves had entered the stone ring. Archaeologists and sound engineers have tested this. When drums were struck, their pulses didn't scatter into the open fields. They reverberated, vibrating across the stones, amplifying like a great skin stretched taut. A chant, repeated rhythmically, didn't merely echo. It surrounded you, wrapping you in a cocoon of vibration. Sound became a force that wasn't just heard, but felt. It trembled in the bones, sank into the skin, became inseparable from the body itself. This transforms our understanding of Stonehenge. It wasn't only a calendar of solstices. It wasn't only a monument to the dead. It was a theater of sensation, a place where ritual became immersive, where those who entered were stripped of the ordinary and plunged into something transcendent. Imagine standing in the crowd, the flicker of firelight casting shadows on the towering stones, the cold night air pressing in, and then, the low thrum of chanting. One voice becomes many, one beat becomes thunder, and in the center of it all, you feel the universe vibrating through your chest. To ancient minds, this was power. Sound was not just noise. It was creation itself. Many ancient cultures believed the world was spoken, sung, or breathed into existence. In the Egyptian tradition, the god Thoth shaped reality with words. In Hindu cosmology, the syllable Om reverberated before the cosmos unfolded. Even in the Hebrew tradition, God speaks, "Let there be light," and light obeys. For the builders of Stonehenge, the circle may have been a chamber where human voices could momentarily borrow the force of creation. And here lies the most haunting thought. Perhaps it wasn't the stones themselves that mattered most, but what they did to sound. Without the voices, the chants, the songs, the structure is mute. But when filled with sound, Stonehenge awakens. The stones come alive, not in motion, but in resonance. It becomes less a monument of stone and more a machine of transformation, turning fragile human voices into something cosmic. There's evidence this wasn't accidental. The very layout of the stones, the horseshoe formation, the circular symmetry, the careful distances between them, all suggest more than mere brute construction. Even fragments of broken stones found nearby show they were struck like gongs, their tones ringing in the open air. The builders may have chosen specific types of stone for their acoustic properties, selecting not just what would stand, but what would sing. Picture that for a moment. Imagine the planning. A culture that left no written record, yet somehow knew how to make stone resonate. They dragged these slabs across miles, not only to erect them, but to orchestrate them like a musician arranging the strings of a harp. Was this knowledge passed down orally, guarded in the memories of a chosen few? Or was it stumbled upon in ritual itself, discovered when the stones first answered back to the human voice? And if they knew what they had built, did they fear it? Did they revere it? Perhaps the circle was too powerful to use lightly. Perhaps it was reserved only for solstices, only for times when the veil was thin, when the balance of sun and shadow could be felt on the skin. The power of sound was sacred, and to misuse it was to risk summoning forces that could not be controlled. There is something almost unsettling in this idea, that the ancients may have stood in the circle and felt exactly what we would feel today. That bone-deep vibration, that uncanny amplification, that sense of something larger than yourself filling the air. We can recreate it with science, with microphones and sound chambers. But they, without any of our machines, stood there thousands of years ago and felt the same awe, the same strangeness, the same suspicion that the stones were alive. The silence of Stonehenge today is deceptive. Visitors walk among the ruins and hear only wind, the cries of birds, the shuffle of feet on grass. But in its prime, the circle may have been deafening, alive with rhythm, voice, and echo, a place where the air itself was charged, where ritual was not only seen, but heard and felt. And so Stonehenge becomes more than mystery. It becomes a reminder of something we've forgotten. That sound is power. That vibration shapes reality. That we are not only observers of the world, but participants in its resonance. Those ancient builders understood this instinctively. They left us a monument that doesn't merely point to the stars, but teaches us how to listen. Perhaps this is why the circle endures, not because of what it looks like, but because of what it once sounded like. Because deep down, across time, we still understand that sound is sacred. We still feel the thrill of resonance in a song, in a chant, in the way voices merge in unison. The stones remind us the universe does not begin in silence. It begins in sound. Long before science began to probe the stones with surveys and carbon dating, their silence was filled with imagination. To a people who gazed at Stonehenge without answers, its mystery was explained through the only language they had, myth. And among these tales, none is more enduring than the story that credits the wizard Merlin with moving the mighty stones. The legend first appeared in the 12th century in the writings of Geoffrey of Monmouth. He described how giants had once brought the stones from Africa to Ireland, a land of magic and myth. There they stood until Merlin, at the command of King Aurelius, transported them across the sea to Salisbury Plain. No wagons, no tools, no laborers, just sorcery. With a wave of his hand, the wizard raised a monument to honor fallen kings. It is easy to dismiss this story as medieval fantasy, yet its power lies not in its literal truth, but in what it reveals about the human need to connect the incomprehensible with the familiar. Stonehenge was too massive, too impossible for ordinary men to imagine building. So the credit was given to beings beyond men, giants, wizards, and otherworldly powers. For the people of the Middle Ages, this was not absurd, it was natural. The world itself was seen as a battleground between divine forces and demonic influences. Churches whispered of relics infused with sacred power. Travelers told tales of saints raising the dead or angels striking down armies. Against that backdrop, Merlin's hand upon the stones was not only believable, it was inevitable. The myth of giants also lingers with significance. Giants represented primal power, beings of both awe and fear. They were said to shape mountains, carve valleys, and create wonders with their sheer size. To imagine Stonehenge as the work of such titans was to acknowledge its scale as something far beyond human proportion. Even today, when modern machinery can explain the mechanics, the vision of giants bending to set the stones in place lingers as a poetic truth. But folklore does more than explain, it preserves. Through centuries, when the monument itself crumbled and half buried itself in the earth, the myths kept it alive in cultural memory. In village taverns, in monastery halls, in whispered fireside stories, Stonehenge was never forgotten. The myths gave the stones an immortal life, carried in imagination long before archaeologists touched the soil. The link to Merlin adds another layer. He was never just a wizard. In medieval imagination, Merlin embodied the liminal space between history and myth, fact and legend. He was counselor to kings, but also a prophet of doom, a being born of both angel and demon. To tie him to Stonehenge was to infuse the monument with prophecy itself, a site not only of the past, but of destiny. Some chroniclers even believed the stones contained healing powers, their arrangement drawing down the energy of the heavens. And perhaps here is where myth and mystery merge most seamlessly. Stonehenge, aligned so precisely with the solstice sun, does seem to drink in celestial fire. To a medieval mind, that was proof enough of enchantment. Was this architecture, or was it alchemy? A structure of stone, or a machine of magic? The story also reveals a truth about human psychology. When confronted with the inexplicable, we do not tolerate silence. The unknown demands explanation, even if that explanation is draped in myth. In that sense, Merlin is not a distraction from history, but a mirror of how people have always processed the unfathomable. Yet these myths also ripple forward into our own age. They are not merely medieval curiosities. The Merlin legend still shapes how tourists approach the site, how artists paint it, how writers imagine it in novels and films. In every retelling, the stones seem to shift. Sometimes a sacred temple, sometimes a portal, sometimes a remnant of giants. Myths keep the monument alive by refusing to let it settle into just one meaning. If archaeology seeks answers, mythology preserves wonder. The two exist in tension, but also in harmony. Without the myth of Merlin, Stonehenge might have remained a forgotten ruin, another heap of weathered rocks on a quiet plain. Instead, it became something larger than itself, a stage where imagination and belief played as fiercely as any ritual once performed inside its circle. The story of Merlin is not merely about one wizard's spell. It is about the enduring power of human creativity to transform mystery into meaning. And while science has pulled away the curtain on many aspects of Stonehenge, That imaginative leap between what we can measure and what we can only dream remains part of its eternal allure. Even as modern scholars point to quarries, sledges, and engineering, there is something haunting in the old tale. For as much as we may know about the monument today, we cannot erase the centuries when it was thought to be the work of magic, and perhaps we shouldn't. For myths are not lies. They are the soul's attempt to reach what reason cannot touch. In that sense, Stonehenge was never merely built, it was imagined into being, carried by giants, set by sorcerers, and woven into the stories of a people who refused to let its silence stay silent. Merlin may not have moved the stones, but the legend ensures that, in another way, he still holds them. For centuries, the stones of Salisbury Plain have been read as a calendar carved into the earth. Their towering presence seems to mark the rhythm of the sun, the solstices, the longest and shortest days of the year. But there is a deeper rhythm hidden here, one so subtle that it slips beneath the grasp of ordinary time. It belongs not to the blazing sun, but to the pale, shifting face of the moon. The moon is restless, never fixed, pulling at the tides and whispering to the night sky in cycles within cycles. Ancient people would have watched it with awe and dread, for its light carried both life and omen. At Stonehenge, new evidence suggests that the builders tracked not only the sun's yearly passage, but also the moon's great cycle, an extraordinary 18.6-year pattern known as the lunar standstill. This cycle alters the rising and setting points of the moon, causing it to climb higher than usual in the sky at its peak and sink lower at its trough. To see it once in a lifetime was rare. To track it precisely demanded patience, memory, and generations of observation. And yet, the geometry of Stonehenge appears to echo this lunar cycle, as if its stones were set to hold the moon itself in place. Why would they care so deeply about such an elusive rhythm? One answer may lie in death. To prehistoric cultures, the moon was a mirror of human existence, waxing with life, waning with age, vanishing into darkness, only to be reborn again. If the sun promised continuity, the moon embodied transformation. To align stone with its hidden cycle may have been to inscribe the mystery of rebirth into the landscape. Archaeologists studying cremated remains buried within the henge discovered that many belonged to individuals who traveled great distances. Stonehenge may have drawn the dead from far-off tribes, serving as a gathering place where rituals bound together life, death, and the cosmos. Imagine fires burning under the moon's highest rise, shadows of the stones stretching like skeletal fingers across the plain. To stand, there was to stand at the threshold between the earthly and the eternal. There is also the possibility of control. If leaders could predict the standstill of the moon, something invisible to the untrained eye, they held a kind of supernatural power. They could name the night when the moon would climb higher than ever before, or when it would bow its head low upon the horizon. To declare such knowledge was to bind people with fear and awe, making the leader not merely human, but a keeper of the sky's secrets. The idea grows stranger still when we realize that Stonehenge is not unique in this lunar obsession. Across the Atlantic, ancient sites in the Americas, such as Chimney Rock in Colorado, align with the same cycle. Cultures separated by oceans and centuries appear to have recognized the same cosmic heartbeat. Did they stumble upon it independently, or does this hint at a deeper, forgotten connection in the human story? What is clear is that Stonehenge was no static monument. It was alive with time, shifting meaning as the sky shifted above it. The solstice sun, the lunar standstill, the dance of shadows, all of these were woven into its purpose. It was a theater for the heavens, and those who gathered there were both the audience and the actors. The moon's hidden role reminds us of something profound, that mystery was not an obstacle to ancient people, but a necessity. To track the unseeable, to mark the immeasurable, was to place human existence within a cosmic order. For those who lived and died under its pale glow, the moon was not just a light in the sky. It was destiny written in phases, and Stonehenge was the book in which it was recorded. Stonehenge, for all its silence, is a monument steeped in echoes of the dead. Beneath its ring of towering stones, archaeologists have unearthed the secret long overshadowed by the debates over calendars and solstices. Buried in the soil are fragments of human lives reduced to ash and bone, a cemetery woven into the very foundations of the monument. These discoveries hint at a truth far darker and far more intimate. Stonehenge may not have been built merely to mark the heavens, but also to house the passage of souls. Excavations have revealed hundreds of cremated remains, carefully placed within the site, many dating back to the earliest phases of its construction. For years, the ashes lay hidden, misinterpreted as nothing more than stray debris from ritual fires. But closer study showed something startling. These were not accidental burnings. The remains were deliberate, their placements precise, as though Stonehenge itself had been conceived as a sacred resting ground. It was not just a monument to the sky. It was a monument to the dead. Some of the burials hold hints of power. Certain skeletons bear signs of status, crafted tools, unique adornments, or evidence of a life once marked by prestige. These were not common graves. They belonged to individuals chosen, remembered, and given a final place beneath the watchful stones. Scholars now suggest that Stonehenge functioned as a cemetery for an elite, perhaps a dynasty of rulers whose memory was preserved in stone and fire. If so, the great monument may have been less a tool for predicting the heavens and more a shrine to an ancestral bloodline, cementing their legacy in the very earth of Salisbury Plain. Yet there is more than prestige hidden in the ground. Among the cremations are bones scarred by fire in ways that suggest violent ends. Some bodies may have been ritually slain before being burned, their deaths woven into ceremonies whose meanings are forever lost to us. In ancient cultures, blood was not simply spilled, it was transformed into a bridge between the living and the divine. Stonehenge, in this light, becomes a place where death was not an ending but a passage, where blood, ash, and bone carried prayers into the eternal sky. This intertwining of life, death, and cosmos reshapes how we understand the monument. It was not only a place to look outward, aligning with the sun and the stars. It was a place to look inward, to reconcile mortality with the eternal cycles of nature. The rising sun at midsummer, the setting sun at midwinter, these celestial events mirrored the lives and deaths of those buried within the stones. Each cremation became a ritual act, binding the human story to the cosmic story, ensuring that the dead would rise and fall in eternal rhythm with the heavens. Some theorists have gone further, suggesting that Stonehenge may have been a place of sacrifice. They point to the symbolic alignment of the stones, the intensity of fire remains, and parallels with other ritual sites across Europe. Blood offerings, whether human or animal, may have been central to the ceremonies that unfolded here. To modern eyes, such practices seem barbaric. But to ancient minds, sacrifice was not cruelty, it was necessity, a way of maintaining balance with forces greater than themselves. Fire, blood, and stone were the language in which humanity spoke to the cosmos. The presence of cremations also connects Stonehenge to broader traditions across prehistoric Britain and beyond. Burial mounds, ritual fires, and ancestral shrines pepper the landscape around the monument, forming a ritual landscape of astonishing scale. The river Avon, flowing nearby, may have served as a symbolic boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Bodies could have been carried along its waters before being laid to rest at Stonehenge, turning the journey itself into a ritual passage. This was not an isolated monument, but the beating heart of a spiritual geography. And yet, the more we uncover, the more unsettling the picture becomes. Some remains appear to have been moved, exhumed, and reburied long after death, as though the living maintained ongoing relationships with their ancestors. This blurring of boundaries between life and death suggests a worldview in which the dead were never fully gone. They lingered, guiding the living, demanding honor and perhaps even fear. Stonehenge was not just a tomb, it was a threshold, a place where the veil between the worlds thinned. What drove this obsession with burial, fire, and ritual? Was it grief, devotion, fear of the unknown? Or was it power and attempt by ancient rulers to sanctify their authority, binding themselves to cosmic cycles in stone and bone? Whatever the truth, the dead were central to Stonehenge's story. The monument's vast stones did not only mark the heavens above, they marked the ashes beneath. When we walk among the stones today, we tread unknowingly over the resting places of those long forgotten. Their bones once fed the flames that lit sacred nights. Their ashes mixed with the soil that still clings to the monument's roots. Their presence is silent, but it is everywhere. Stonehenge is more than a circle of stone. It is a circle of lives, of deaths, of rituals that sought to bind the fragile human soul to the eternal rhythm of the cosmos. And in that realization lies the darker truth. The monument we marvel at was not built only for the living. It was built for the dead. For thousands of years, Stonehenge stood as a silent sentinel of human ambition and mystery. Yet despite its monumental presence, this circle of stones has never been untouchable. In fact, its survival into the modern age has been nothing short of miraculous. What we see today is not simply an ancient structure, but the survivor of countless assaults, both intentional and accidental, stretching across centuries. Its continued existence tells a story not only of resilience, but of the strange ways humanity treats its own sacred heritage. In the medieval period, long after its original meaning had been forgotten, Stonehenge was no longer seen as untouchable. Farmers, builders, and looters treated the monument less as a sacred site and more as a convenient quarry. Massive stones were toppled to be broken into fragments, hauled away, and reshaped into bridges, barns, and even millstones. Each theft chipped away at its original power, yet each fragment carried the weight of ancient history into unsuspecting hands. By the 14th century, entire stones had vanished from the monument's ring, swallowed by the hunger of a world that saw more value in practical use than spiritual reverence. But theft was only the beginning. Nature, too, seemed determined to test Stonehenge's endurance. Centuries of rain, frost, and storms slowly eroded the monument, softening the once sharp edges of its great sarsens and gnawing at the fragile bluestones. Lichens grew across their surfaces, carving delicate patterns of decay over thousands of years. To many, these scars were invisible, but for those who stood close, they were marks of a monument not frozen in time, but slowly disintegrating before the eyes of history. Then came the modern age, a new kind of danger. As industrialization swept across Britain, railways were laid, towns expanded, and the countryside transformed. Stonehenge, once isolated and lonely on Salisbury Plain, suddenly found itself surrounded by roads, fencing, and eventually the roar of automobiles. Visitors flocked to the site, not with reverence, but with curiosity and sometimes carelessness. In the 18th and 19th centuries, antiquarians and early tourists hacked off pieces of stone as souvenirs. Graffiti was carved into the megaliths by those desperate to leave their mark on eternity. A monument built with unimaginable effort was reduced to a backdrop for casual destruction. Even when preservation was finally attempted, controversy followed. By the late 19th century, leaning stones were crudely set upright with wooden props, like bones held in place with splints. In 1901, one of the fallen trilithons was re-erected with concrete foundations, sparking outrage among purists who believed the very act of repairing Stonehenge stripped it of authenticity. Was the monument truly surviving if it was being altered by human hands? Or was this a new kind of vandalism, cloaked in the language of preservation? Stonehenge entered the 20th century scarred but standing, and yet the threats only intensified. The First World War turned Salisbury Plain into a landscape of training grounds, trenches, and artillery fire. Soldiers drilled within sight of the stones, and explosions echoed through the soil that had cradled them for millennia. Though Stonehenge itself was not targeted, the war left its mark on the land, adding yet another layer of conflict to a site already burdened with centuries of loss. In the decades that followed, the monument became a battleground, not of armies, but of ideologies. Ownership disputes erupted, debates over access raged, and Stonehenge was caught between being a national treasure and a commercial attraction. By the 1960s and 70s, mass gatherings and countercultural festivals transformed the ancient site into a stage for rebellion. Thousands camped among the stones, some climbing and even toppling smaller fragments in the chaos. For archaeologists, these gatherings threatened to undo centuries of fragile preservation. For protesters, however, the gatherings symbolized reclaiming a forgotten spiritual heritage from the grip of official control. Yet perhaps the most surprising threats came not from looters or careless tourists, but from modern political protest. In recent years, Stonehenge has found itself at the center of climate activism, with demonstrators targeting the monument to draw attention to ecological collapse. In 2023, activists sprayed orange paint across its ancient stones, shocking the world and igniting fierce debates. To some, this was an unforgivable desecration of one of humanity's most iconic monuments. To others, it was a desperate act, using a timeless symbol to highlight the urgency of a planetary crisis. Once again, Stonehenge was forced to bear the weight of battles far beyond its original purpose. And yet, despite vandalism, theft, war, tourism, and protest, Stonehenge endures. The stones remain standing, silent against the winds of history, each scar and fracture telling a story of survival. Their endurance transforms them into something more than just relics. They are testaments to the idea that meaning cannot be destroyed so easily. No matter how many times humanity has turned against its own creation, the monument resists, holding its place in the landscape like a heartbeat that refuses to fade. What makes this survival so powerful is not just the physical endurance of the stones, but the cultural resilience they embody. Each attempt to damage or claim Stonehenge has, paradoxically, only reinforced its symbolic weight. Every threat has drawn more attention, more reverence, and more determination to preserve it. The monument has become more than a circle of stones. It is a mirror of our relationship with history itself. Sometimes careless, sometimes reverent, sometimes destructive, yet always compelled to return to the mystery at its center. In the end, Stonehenge survives not because it is invulnerable, but because it has become indispensable. It carries scars of theft, vandalism, and protest, yet those scars only deepen its legend. It is no longer just a monument of the past, but a survivor of the present, a fragile reminder that what we choose to protect or neglect ultimately reflects what we value as a civilization. And Stonehenge, against all odds, has proven that even in the face of centuries of threats, survival itself can become the greatest story of all. Science has unraveled many of Stonehenge's riddles. The origins of its stones have been traced across the landscape of Britain. The Sarsens, immense and immovable, were quarried not far from the site, while the bluestones, astonishingly, were dragged from the mountains of Wales more than 150 miles away. Through sweat, ingenuity, and perhaps an obsession bordering on madness, ancient builders transported these boulders across rivers, forests, and plains. The sheer logistics alone stand as proof of extraordinary human determination. Archaeologists, with their careful measurements and radiocarbon dating, have revealed that Stonehenge was constructed not in one burst of effort, but over centuries. Generations who would never meet, who spoke different dialects and carried different customs, laid their hands on the same stones. It was not the achievement of a single culture, but a chain of devotion passed from ancestors to descendants, each adding a new piece to a puzzle that none would live to see completed. And still, the mystery deepens. The circle's alignment with the solstices suggests a calendar, perhaps even a temple of the heavens. On the longest day of the year, the sun rises directly over the heel stone, casting its light through the center of the monument. On the shortest day, the midwinter sun sinks with equal precision into alignment. Was this their great cosmic clock, ensuring that time itself was anchored in stone? Or was it something even deeper, a ritual reminder that light returns even after the darkest night? Researchers have uncovered signs of feasts and gatherings on these grounds. Animal bones unearthed from the soil reveal massive banquets, with people traveling from across the island to share in ceremonies. Stonehenge was not a silent temple in its prime. It was alive with music, with chanting, with the echoes of drums and flutes bouncing between those ancient pillars. Recent studies even show that the stones themselves may have had acoustic properties, amplifying sound in ways that turned every chant into a chorus, every drumbeat into thunder. And yet, for all the science, for all the carbon dating, the measurements, and the reconstructions, one truth slips through our fingers. Why? Why did they do this? Why gather stones heavier than any house and raise them into the sky with primitive ropes and wooden sledges? Why march hundreds of miles carrying bluestones across treacherous ground? Why pour centuries of effort into a circle of rock? Some believe it was a temple of the dead, a bridge between the living and the ancestors. Others argue it was a celestial observatory, a way to map the heavens and bring the stars down to earth. Still others whisper that Stonehenge was never meant to be understood by outsiders, that its purpose was secret even then. A sacred language, carved not into tablets or scrolls, but into the very bones of the land. What we know is this: Stonehenge was never an isolated monument. Surrounding it, archaeologists have uncovered miles of earthworks, avenues, and burial mounds. The landscape itself was shaped into a kind of vast ceremonial stage, where stone and soil worked together to carry meaning. It was not simply about the stones, it was about the way they interacted with the land, the sky, and the seasons. And perhaps this is the final riddle. Stonehenge reveals itself to science, but only in fragments. Yes, we know where the stones came from. Yes, we can measure the alignments. Yes, we can reconstruct the rituals. But the deeper truth, the soul of the monument, resists explanation. It is as if the builders wove silence into the very heart of their creation, ensuring that the more we learn, the more we realize what cannot be learned. That is the paradox of Stonehenge, revealed yet unsolved. A puzzle that seems to grow more mysterious with every answer. A monument that refuses to be reduced to facts and figures. It stands in the fields of Wiltshire as both triumph and enigma, echoing across time. And maybe that is its true power. Not as a solved riddle, not as an archaeological curiosity, but as a reminder that some things are meant to endure in mystery. Stonehenge teaches us that not everything is built for clarity. Some things are built to remind us of wonder. Some things are built to whisper across the ages, daring us to keep asking. So when you stand before those stones, you are not just seeing the work of ancient hands. You are seeing a conversation across thousands of years. A message written not in ink, but in silence. A monument not only of stone, but of mystery itself. And in that silence, the builders still speak.